Hello and welcome to AXSChat. I'm really pleased that we're bringing to the show today Marcie Roth, who is the relatively recent newly appointed CEO of World Institute on Disability. This is not the first time we've had World Institute on Disability on, but it's the first time that we have welcomed Marcie in her role. And I thought that it was particularly important to bring Marcie on right now because of Marcie's background in disasters and emergency preparedness. Given that we're in the middle of several disasters and emergencies all simultaneously, it seemed like an opportune moment to have a conversation. So welcome, Marcie. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself. Of course, Debra and I know you because we're board members. And proud to serve on the board of this great organization. But tell us, a bit about your background, because you bring a wealth of experience.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to be a part of this great work that you all are doing. A little bit about me. I've always worked in disability rights. From very early on in high school, and it became very clear to me early on that the rights of people with disabilities were totally disregarded. And over the years, I've had lots and lots of opportunities, both as a person with a disability myself, as a parent of now two adult children with disabilities, and as a part of my daily existence. Disability rights has just always been fundamentally a part of who I am. I've worked at the local level, state level, national level, globally, but in 2001, immediately following the terrorist attacks in the US, I found myself being looked to for guidance on how people with disabilities in New York City could continue the supports and services that they need when they had sort of cordoned off the area around Ground Zero. And, after many, many years of working in disability services and disability rights, I had never really thought about what happens for people with disabilities in disasters. And, that period began what for me was an almost 20-year journey in which my focus became really very much on what happens before, during, and after disasters. Had the great opportunity in 2009 to join the Obama administration as senior advisor to the FEMA administrator. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the US, and my role there was to begin to reform the process by which the US federal government and all of government plan for, prepare, respond, and then engage in recovery when there's a disaster. So spent a number of years in the government trying to improve that process. And by improve it, meaning that we engage people with disabilities as subject matter experts, as our guides in what it's going to take for people to be included before, during, and after disasters. spent almost 8 years working on that, and left FEMA, started an organization called the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, spent several years there building a national and global partnership with many, many stakeholders working, again, specifically on public health emergencies and disasters. And then a few months ago, I had the incredible opportunity to join the World Institute on Disability as the executive director and CEO. And now, having been at WID for about 8 months, have really had an incredible journey forward as we, refresh and move the organization forward, including some new areas of work that I'm guessing you'd love to talk about.
So both Debra and I were part of this whole sort of recruitment process, and whilst disasters and emergencies was an area that was previously covered by WID as an area of expertise, none of us that were doing the selection could have envisaged what was going to hit us only a few months later. We all been expecting some pandemic at some stage. We thought it might have been the bird flu or whatever, but when it hits, no one's ever fully prepared. And then on top of that, we've had significant political events compounding the issues of the lockdown and the economic impacts and the isolation. There are so many issues that directly impact people with disabilities that are not thought about in the response to COVID-19, or in the response to how we're dealing with the political issues that are arising around the world. And then on top of that, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen all of the protests going on as a result of this systemic racism, and which is also mapped and equaled with ableism, because you alluded to the ignoring of our rights, because whilst we have as a community acquired rights over the years, they're often not applied. So how are you, firstly, coping with all of this stuff, and what does it mean in terms of what can WID offer, and what can the disability community offer, and also how do I'm asking you too many questions. This is a whole load of stuff.
Bring them on.
Well, right. I'll stop there. I mean, and say, so what are some of the things that you're doing to address the amazing conflux of significant crises right now?
I will begin by saying, for the organization, when I came on board, I asked the team, so, what's our continuity of operations plan? Because that's something that, I've done a lot of work in. And just like just about everybody else, no surprise, folks hadn't really yet figured out what a continuity of operations plan is, how you accomplish that, what's needed. So we were already sort of starting down that road. I asked the question, how are we dealing with remote operations? Excuse me. And, we have a fairly large team at the WID headquarters in Berkeley, California. And then we have a few remote workers. And I think at the time that I asked the question, folks were quite insistent that there were things that just had to be done in a physical setting. And I kind of pushed back and said, well, I'd really like to, do as much as we can to move things to remote operations where we can. I remember having a conversation at the beginning of March when we were first starting to see that, some sort of a shutdown was going to be necessary. And, I remember asking the question, okay, what do we need to do to shut down and move to a remote operation? Happily, by that point, we had figured just about everything out. So as an organization, we were in a position to pretty seamlessly continue to operate. Early in March, the organization our board had approved our strategic plan that had been under development since just a couple of months before. And we had, among our domains, primary areas of focus for the organization, we had determined that we were going to be focusing on emergency preparedness, disaster risk reduction, and climate resilience as a focal point of some of our work. And so we had, literally the ink was not dry on that decision. And we had the beginnings of a year-long plan to start to operationalize some of that. And within days, we had to throw that plan into overdrive. So, I can talk a little bit more about what that's looking like for us, but to answer some of your other questions as I sort of do the deep dive into this, immediately we joined with a number of other disability organizations and started to look at what we knew were going to be some of the most difficult elements. And we, late in February, WID joined with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, the National Council on Independent Living, and about 180 other organizations who signed on to a call to action around what we were anticipating was going to be a very difficult, a disproportionately difficult circumstance for people with disabilities. Some of the issues, first and foremost, and this is something we're struggling with today, there is a continual focus by governments and media to refer to the people who are most disproportionately impacted as being people who are older and people who have what are fondly referred to as having underlying conditions. And, these are code for disability. Everybody who has underlying conditions is a person with a disability. And so, and the disproportionality of the impact of the virus has really been centered on people who are living in long-term care facilities, congregate settings, and um, as shockingly, horrifyingly high as those numbers are, what folks are not acknowledging is the 30,000 people plus who have died here in the US, for example, in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities. Everybody keeps referring to them as, older. Well, in fact, you don't go to a nursing home because you're old. You don't go into a facility, a congregate facility, because you're old. You go because you have a disability and the supports and services that you need in order to continue to maintain your health, your safety, your independence, your dignity are unavailable out in the community. And for that reason, you've been institutionalized. Yeah. And so we have tens of thousands of people in just a few weeks who've lost their lives.
Yeah, and we see it on social media. There are people disappearing from our world, that have been advocates and so on. I think one of the points that I would like to bring up around this is the innate ableism in the messaging that's coming out. It's like, oh, don't worry, it's not about you. You're not going to have, it's not so much of a problem for you. It's only for, older people and people with pre-existing conditions. So it's like, yeah, so basically that's a statement that you don't care about our elders and our disabled communities. It's like, it's not you that's going to die, so don't worry. That's not really the kind of messaging I would, want to hear from my government, but that's the kind of messaging that we have heard. And in the UK too, we've had many thousands of deaths and excess deaths in care homes. And I think it's the excess deaths that are really telling, because we measure an excess death because people always die in care homes. It's part of the nature of those places. But the issue is that so many more people are dying, and so much more rapidly. And the fact that we were in the UK actually discharging people from hospital into care homes without testing them for COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So we were literally sending the virus into the places where people were most vulnerable, and that was a government policy. Mm-hmm. And that to me is unforgivable. And clearly, that policy has innate ableism in it. And normally I'm a positive person. I talk about the positives and what we can do, and how we can, build on stuff and build communities. But the last few months, we've really seen how little people value people with disabilities.
That's right. We have seen something I think many of us feared might be true, but hoped that we had made enough progress. But, it is very clear that people with disabilities, our value, the value of older people, the value of people of color, the value of a very large number of most of us has been othered. And the very small number of people who are not directly impacted have an amazing amount of power. And we've done a very difficult, we've done a very poor job of moving the needle on that. And, as you said, Neil, you're usually focusing on the positive. I do want to talk about opportunity. I don't know that things could be much worse than they are. Never want to say never. And I'm quite sure that the current circumstances are unbelievably bad for many, many people. But I also think we have three choices right now. We can keep doing what we've been doing. We can, kind of stay stuck right where we're at. We can always go back to the way we were doing things, or we can choose to move forward. And as people with disabilities, I, for one, am calling on all of us to use this as a call to action to change, to make a fundamental difference. And I think it starts with not accepting the status quo. It starts with reaching a hand forward, reaching a hand back, bringing folks to our tables to talk about this stuff, to be angry, to be sad, to be very honest with each other in a kind way. Honest, but kind, not pitting ourselves against each other. And, we know, the World Institute on Disability has held now 2 town hall meetings. Our second town hall meeting was yesterday. We had folks from 25 countries, every continent except for Antarctica. We're working on that. Bringing folks together to talk about disaster and disability. And we've been listening very carefully to horrifying stories. We will continue to listen, but we are in a position to do something about it. And whether it's working with business and industry around the anticipated loss of the growth that we've made in employment for people with disabilities, whether it's around the progress that we've made in assistive technology that may slow down because the economy has been hit so hard. Whatever it is, we are in a position to come together and start to build solutions that benefit the resilience of the whole community. One of the things that the World Institute on Disability is in the process of launching is a global disaster. We're calling it, we haven't actually rolled it out yet, but we are in the process of rolling out the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration. So we are going to use disasters, COVID, concurrent disasters, future disasters, because heaven knows they're going to come. We're going to use those as opportunities to bring funders, disability leaders, emergency managers, other stakeholders together, led by people with disabilities, led by disability-led organizations, with a focus on accelerating resources in disasters to the places where they're needed the most. And I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more.
I think Debra's got a question.
Please.
Well, and I apologize for getting upset on camera. I have a husband with dementia, and watching what's happening in the United States is just really hard. But also, I think the opportunity here is in the first place, for us to really see this, for us to really see what is happening. And very proud to be on the board of WID, as is Neil. And I was one of the, I'm on the executive board, but this keeps going on. And I'm not talking about just COVID. We don't appreciate who people are. We don't appreciate all the intersectionalities of being a human being. And so I really am glad that WID is taking a leadership role. I'm glad that WID is focusing on more than the United States. I think the world is seeing, believe it or not, there's more than the United States. The United States is a beautiful, amazing, just a wonderful country in so many ways. We're seeing the underbelly of the United States, but the reality is it is not the same in the United States for someone like me, a Caucasian woman of, medium, economic, as it is for my fellow African Americans, as it is for, my team members that are African Americans and disabled. And the misinformation, the fake news, the ridiculousness, the fighting at the time, what we're doing to protest.
Yeah. What we're doing to protesters, what we are doing to undermine what our government is doing to undermine the free speech that we've fought so hard for. And for people with disabilities, we are still not enjoying free speech. And here we are with our very basic rights, our very basic human rights being threatened.
Yeah,
and
it's tremendous. It's a tremendously febrile atmosphere that we're in at the moment. And picking up on Debra's point, I feel angry about what has happened to people, what is continuing to happen to people, how people in power are manipulating a situation that is costing people's lives for their own personal gain. And this is not just happening in one country. It's being the crisis is being utilized to further extremism around the world and erode people's rights. But also, as a 6 foot something, blue-eyed, white, Anglo-Saxon male, me expressing my outrage is, I'm conflicted about it, because I want to express my outrage at what's happening, But at the same time, I don't want my voice to drown out the voices of people who really need to express their outrage, who really are the ones in the front line and are being persecuted and shot at with rubber bullets. And I'm sat in a comfortable place in leafy Surrey with a job, so I can't really complain.
We need your voice. That's a mistake we keep making. We keep making that mistake, right? That our voices don't matter.
So no, I'm happy to add my voice, but I don't want to do it to this. I don't want it to become virtue signaling, you know, because it's not about that. And it's finding that line between expressing your support and your outrage and virtue signaling, and then actually thinking about how can I, you know, do things that really go beyond saying I'm outraged. You know, yes, I can read the literature. I can, you know, go and, you know, engage with and learn from people. But what else can I do? You know, how can I support the communities that suffer this systemic prejudice? Because it is systemic, it's built into the system, and if anything, the system is really kicking in hard right now.
Yeah.
So those are the questions I'm asking myself, and you know, and I hope that there are organisations that you know, the WID and the coalition can help, and that we can work with people that that intersectionally suffer very similar issues to the disability community. I won't claim to be the one suffering, because I'm not, but I am outraged by it.
What I see is a kind of a clear divide between countries with empathy and countries without empathy. You know, some countries that don't have that many resources, they are not on the G7 or on the G20. They are just driving on empathy, and they are able to do a lot. Other countries are known as being, you know, leaders, have been very, you know, doing everything well on the finance side. You know, they don't have that, but on the other end, they have no empathy for their elderly, and then they use the excuse of age or caring homes to dehumanize people. You know, oh, they are, you know, they don't matter, they are not part, and this is the divide that I've seen, that I see quite worrying. And then sometimes the media helps and supports that kind of a message and normalize that message within a certain society. In other societies, the media would turn against, and they will have a voice, and then a balance is being kept. So I can give you an example. In Portugal, they enlarged the support to everyone that is in the country to be supported if they have needs, if they are sick. They will have full access to healthcare. You know, independently, you know, even if you are someone here and you are illegal, you have access to that. In other countries like Australia, if you are a student, a foreign student, please leave the country. You know, we can't support you. So I've seen, you know, it's not about, you know, it's about attitude and empathy. I think that's what's making the difference here.
And 2 points I want to make. One is, I thought we were here in the US, I thought we were that empathetic country. I didn't necessarily think we were getting it all right. As a matter of fact, I was quite sure we were not getting it all right. But I thought that we were, that was who we were aspiring to be.
And Marcie, that is who we are. It's just not who our leaders are. And it's not who our processes. We are not being as empathetic as we thought we were going to be. And I know I'm a dork sitting crying like a, you know, but this is really ridiculous. And I'm trying to explain it to my husband with dementia, who I don't know how to explain it. How do I explain it to my daughter? I don't know, this is ridiculous, but most people in the United States are beautifully empathetic. We're the first people out to help, but we're real broken.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Marcie.
Oh, no. And you're absolutely right about that. It's not, it is not our people. It is our government. And I think we've all been shocked. Well, we haven't all been shocked. Many of us are shocked by what's unfolding. The thing that I'm struggling with is, well, I'm struggling with a lot of things, but I want to do better. I want to be better. And at the same time, I'm really uncomfortable with this idea that now I need to look to my husband, who happens to be Black, to the other Black and brown people in my life, and sort of, I'm not hearing folks saying, I'm hearing people saying, you people of privilege need to shut up and listen to us. But I'm not hearing them say, and it's now our responsibility to explain it. It's not, it's now not, we haven't somehow put an additional burden on people of color to now be the ones to help us to figure it out. So just the same as it's not okay for us to tokenize people with disabilities, it's not okay for us to sort of, check a box that we've got somebody who has a particular look or somebody who has some sort of a visible disability. It's not their responsibility to be our example. At the same time, I think we also need to figure out how to authentically listen without being ridiculous in the process, And it's conversations like these, except we need to have other folks in these conversations helping us without burdening them, helping us to identify what it is that we can do to help. As a spouse of somebody with dementia, on the one hand, we need to know what you and your husband need. But we also need to be careful we're not burdening you with the responsibility to make it okay for us. As a person with a disability who, it's starting to look like I have become one of the homebound. I'm not going to be able to go out anytime soon. I am almost definitely one of those people who will die if I get this virus. Almost definitely. Although, as somebody who has been taking hydroxychloroquine for 10 years, I may have some sort of, special powers, but on the assumption that I don't, I'm probably going to need to stay home for a very long time.
So we talked about the choice of language with Martin Sibley not long ago, and he said, "I don't want to be considered vulnerable. I'm high risk." Yeah, and I think that's right. You have a high risk. You're not a vulnerable person. You have a disability, and there is a high risk of you being disproportionately affected by this virus.
And, you know, I love talking about language, and I really welcome the fact that you raised this. We are doing such a disservice by sort of lumping so many people under the vulnerable umbrella, because in a disaster, whether it's a public health emergency like a pandemic, whether it's an earthquake, you know, name your emergency or disaster, we're all vulnerable, but we're vulnerable because the failures of our infrastructure, we're vulnerable because of the failures of our government and those who have a responsibility to be inclusive in their planning. I'm not inherently vulnerable, quite the opposite. You know, as a person with a disability, as a parent, I am so good at anticipating problems and finding solutions. You want me. I'm an asset. I'm not a liability, right? You want me as a part of your planning team. I am not vulnerable unless you plan without me, unless I am excluded and not given the resources that I need in order to be able to be an asset in my community. Everybody can be a force multiplier. Everybody has a role to play before, during, and after disasters. And communities that get that right are the communities that are the most resilient. And the risk factors for me are, you know, sure, you know, because of my disability, because of my health conditions, because of, you know, blah, blah, blah. Sure, I do, in fact, have some significant risk. But my risk has been significantly impacted by the failure of the government to address this pandemic at the front end, the failure of our government to give our communities the tools and the resources that we've needed, the political gaminess that has resulted in the denial of personal protective equipment for some communities.
Yeah.
Apparently based on some political decisions, based on some, you know, ill-gotten gain.
Yes, indeed. Right? And we're seeing similar failures in our own, in the UK too, where we've huge numbers of deaths, and many of them are unnecessary because we've taken political decisions. For example, the fact that we've taken a political decision to open up our economy and come out of lockdown when we're not really prepared. We haven't got the contact tracing in place, where, you know, all of these kind of things. They're political decisions that are going to result in people's death, that are unnecessary because we haven't been prepared, and we've also decided that this is, you know, serving an agenda. I could talk about this for a lot longer. Unfortunately, we have to close, but I'd like to thank, you know, the people that keep us going here, the Barclays Access, the Microlink, the MyClearText for keeping us captioned and accessible. Sorry, lovely corporate people, if we got a bit political today. I'll make it up to you later. But you know, these are tough times, and you know what? I'm not talking about party affiliations here. I'm talking about, you know, failures of our system, the failures of our checks and balances. You know, it's more than just party politics. So thank you, Marcie, because it's been a rich conversation, and I'm sure that we're going to have a very rich conversation on Twitter.
I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for including me, for peeling back the layers of this onion with me a little bit. And, you know, I welcome continued robust discussion and the call to action that we all need
Yes.
to be taking right now. We can continue to make the same mistakes and then be shocked by the fact that we're getting the same results, or we can use this as an opportunity.
And we need to stay with it until we fix it this time. We can't, this keeps happening over and over and over again, and we cannot keep ignoring it and going back to sleep and thinking that this is going to go away. We have to have the will to resolve these issues. We all have to have the will.
That's right. That's right. I'm in. Count me in.
That's right. Thank you, Marcie.
Thank you all very much. Be well. Take care.